Shalom, and thank you for watching this video from HaDerekh Synagogue. I hope you are liking the content we are bringing you. If you could like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, that will greatly help us. And to further help bring great content to you from our teachers, if you could please consider to donate to HaDerekh Synagogue. The link is in the description box below. Thank you for watching.
The oral law, when God gave Israel the Torah, he gave us 613 commands. How to follow the commandments, he didn't tell us. And this was intentional. He gave it to Israel, and he said, you guys follow this together. So you determine how to do it, right? And he didn't tell us how to determine how to do it. We determined how to determine how to do it. Okay? And how did we do it? We did it through argument. We did it through discussion. And the leadership hacked on it for generations. And until everything began to be codified with the Anshe Knesset Agdola, with the men of the Great Assembly, under Ezra in the exile. Then we kind of got, hey, this is important. The temple was destroyed because we weren't paying good enough attention to this stuff. So the oral law came, and the oral law is not law. The oral law is discussion. Many times the discussion comes to a conclusion. This is how we do it. Many times the discussion does not come to a conclusion, right? It would be like the Supreme Court, which has the Supreme Court opinion and the minority opinion, okay? And if no decision was made between the two, right? If they would both be, but regardless, the minority opinion is still, it's important, it's valid. So for instance, last week we were talking about divorce. It was in the Parsha. In the oral law, there's a very famous discussion in the Mishnah between Hillel and Shammai, which happened right before Yeshua's birth, okay, and about 350 years after this period of time in Gedalia when we're talking about. And Shammai says in the discussion, you can only divorce someone in the case of adultery, right? And this is what Yeshua said. And Hillel says, you can divorce even if she just burns dinner. And so how is this resolved in the Mishnah? The answer is it's not. Both opinions are laid out there. Now, which opinion is right? First off, you have to look at this and recognize immediately, this is not Torah. It's not written like Torah. You can't look at it like it's Torah. You don't say, oh, this is a command. God said this is the commandment. This is not what this is. You read this like you're reading the notes of a discussion. When I was very young, my father, he said to me, he says, Steve, Talmud is like if you put Sir Isaac Newton and Stephen Hawking and Galileo, right, in a room and they had a discussion about physics. And then you wrote it down. And their points of view are completely different and they're sort of all over the board. That's Talmud. Okay? So that's what it is. This isn't God commanding. This is Israel working out how do we follow this commandment together. Very clear. Commandment says we can get divorced. Okay, so under what circumstance can we get divorced? How do we get divorced? Well, Mishnah looks at it, and Mishnah gives us two concepts, 2 points of view, 2 ideas, and comes to no resolution. Why? Because the circumstances of each case are important. So, for instance, let's say we're all part of a Beit Din. So we're the judges. And a couple comes to us and she says, I want a divorce. And he says, I don't want a divorce. So we talk to him first. She leaves the room. And he says, I didn't ever commit adultery. I never did. And I don't want a divorce. We send him out. We bring her in. She says, I want a divorce. You say, well, he says he never committed adultery. And she says, he didn't. I believe that. I don't think he did. Well, then why do you want a divorce? He comes home drunk 3 nights a week. He beats me. I was in the hospital twice last year. And I want out. So what do? Right? No adultery, right? Well, this is why the Mishnah is structured the way it is. We are free as a Beit Din to take Hillel's point of view and say, yes, we can, this case, it's clear that they should be able to get a divorce. Next case. Couple comes in. She says, I want a divorce. He says, I don't want a divorce. So we talk to him first, and he says, I never committed adultery. We bring her in. We say, he says he never committed adultery. She says, I believe that. I don't think he did commit adultery. Well, why do you want a divorce? She said, that man leaves the cap off the toothpaste every single day, and I've had enough. I want out. Now, we look at Shammai's point. Shammai's point is that marriage is not frivolous. This is something that's important, that's created by God. So in this case, we can look at her and say, no, we could take Shammai's position and say only in the case of adultery. And no, you got to go work this out. And by the way, there's a good counselor. You need to. But the point is that the court can follow Torah with either perspective, with either point of view. And it really depends on the individual case and the individual situation. And there's lots of things in the oral law like this. There's also things that come down to, well, this is what we do, right? This is how we wear tzitzit. We wear a kippah. Why do we wear a kippah? You know why we wear a kippah? Well, Torah says, Mamlechet Kohanim to you. You will be a kingdom of priests. And Torah says, priests kept their heads covered when they ministered before God. Therefore, our understanding and our interpretation is men keep their head covered. It's that simple. Okay? So, does it say specifically you have to wear a kippah? No. Does that matter? Not in the least. Because this is Israel's understanding of how to fulfill those commandments. Okay? So, if you disagree with Israel, you're wrong. Because we're all in this together. Okay? So, if you go off by yourself, as it says in Numbers chapter 15, verse 39, don't follow after your own heart and own eyes, right? What does this mean? This means you do what Israel does, right? So I don't mix milk and meat. So it says that you shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk. And from that, and derived from that, is the idea that we don't mix milk and meat when we eat. Can you make a case that that's not really what it means? The answer is sure you can. But so what? It doesn't matter. This is what Israel thinks it means, and this is what, right. And in a lot of these things, you could say, well, I don't think it really means that. I think it means something different, and it doesn't matter. And the whole point is you shouldn't be different than the whole house of Israel. You shouldn't set yourself apart. Follow after your own eyes and own heart. And that we're doing it together. This is how we do it, right? We're coming up on Sukkot, and we're going to build a sukkah out there. How are you going to build a sukkah? Right? Well, it's a temporary dwelling. It says to dwell in the sukkah. Leshev b'sukkah. Doesn't say so. So what does that mean? What does it mean? Well, let's have a discussion over 1,000 years. And we did, and we came up with the idea. So, we're Jewish. To dwell somewhere means to eat. If you go in there and you eat, you're dwelling. So that's what we got. Right? You want to go into the sukkah and you dwell, you eat something. Okay, do you have to sleep in it? No. Can you sleep in it? Sure. Knock yourself out. Especially with kids. Oh my gosh. Sleeping in the sukkah, oh, great fun. Okay? But is it required? Is that the mitzvah? No. Just eat. How do you build the sukkah? Well, the step number 1 is to go to the Shulchan Aruch, and Yosef Karo laid out all of the things that you need to do to build a sukkah. Right? It's got to have at least 3 walls, and it's got to have a roof that you can see stars through, and you've got it can't be attached to a building, can't be under a tree. I mean, there's all kinds of things. Can't be anything an overhang over it. Right? It's really funny. In the United States, you've got condos, an apartment building, right? And everybody's got their lanai out the back, and the lanai above, and the lanai above. So because not in Israel, you got a lanai, and the next floor up, and the lanai is over here. Next floor up, the lanai is over here. So that above you, so you can build a sukkah on your lanai, Okay? Why is it that way? Because this is how Israel does it. Okay? And that's what the oral law is all about. Okay? God didn't say, this is how Israel does it. Israel said, this is how Israel does it. God gave the commandment. That's all. And he intentionally left it to us to work out. And if you look at Yeshua and how Yeshua dealt with the oral law, I've yet to find anywhere where what he said actually went against the oral law. Now, there's a couple of places where there were contentions within the Prushim, within the Pharisees, about the oral law. One faction said one thing, another faction said another thing, and Yeshua addressed that. But every single time that happened, what ended up being the actual oral law, whether it had been established prior or was established immediately after Yeshua, was exactly what Yeshua was saying. Okay? Healing on Shabbat. Are you allowed to heal on Shabbat? Yes and no. Yes and no. Right, but if it's a life or limb, oh yeah, absolutely, yeah. If it's a scratch, you got a headache, right? You don't have any aspirin left at home. Don't go to the store and buy aspirin. Wait a couple hours after Havdalah, then go to the store and get some aspirin. You can be uncomfortable for a couple hours. That's fine, right? So how did we get synagogue? Well, the temple had been destroyed. And the Anshe Knesset Agdola got together and said, look, open up your Bibles, Numbers chapter 28 and 29. There are all of these sacrifices that are made. There's a daily sacrifice, there's a sacrifice for Shabbat, there's a sacrifice for Rosh Hashanah, there's a sacrifices for Yom Kippur, there's sacrifices for Pesach and Sukkot and Shavuot. We can't do any of those anymore. What do you do? And they came up with the principle that is with us today. That is, if you cannot actually physically impossible to do a commandment of God, you don't ignore it. You do as much as you possibly can. You're showing Hashem that it's your desire, it's your ratzon, it's your will that you would be doing it. But you can't. We can't make the sacrifices because the temple isn't built in Jerusalem. So we'll do the entire sacrificial program, except for the sacrifice itself. And we'll call it Beit Knesset, the house of assembly, which in Greek is synagogue. And so every synagogue service is actually commemorating a sacrifice, a national sacrifice, not an individual one, but a national sacrifice. Every morning at dawn, we have the dawn sacrifice. And you say dawn in Hebrew, shachar. So the shacharit service is the dawn sacrifice service. And that's the Amidah. That's the part during the service that the sacrifice would take place. Except we don't make the sacrifice because the temple isn't built. And so the whole service is structured around that. In the evening, sunset, the mincha service, again, another one of those. We have the Musaf service on Shabbat. Musaf just means additional. Because on Shabbat, aside from the daily offering, there's an offering just for Shabbat. And that's the Musaf service. It's a Musaf offering. And while we're praying the Amidah and the Musaf, what are we reading about? The Shabbat sacrifice. Okay? And the same is true for Rosh Hashanah. Same is true for Rosh Hashanah. There's a Musaf sacrifice. It's a sacrifice specifically for Rosh Hashanah. For Yom Teruah. And so we have a Musaf service for Rosh Hashanah. And not only do we make the sacrifice, we do what we did in the temple. Not the sacrifice, but we blow the shofar. Okay? And so every single service that you have in synagogue is a commemoration of a specific sacrifice that we can't do. So we don't ignore it. When we went back, when Ezra and Nehemiah brought us back to Israel, we brought synagogue with us. And suddenly, the amount of idol worship crashed. Right? The sages say that synagogue put the eye out of the idol worship. Why? Because before, we only went to the temple 3 times a year. And that's the very observant ones. Other than that, where's Judaism? Here we had in every village and every town, we had a gathering place that daily you'd gather and have a service, bagels and a schmear. That's what the oral law is all about. And it got more and more and more organized. Hillel and Shammai, right before Yeshua, were the last of the Zugot, the people that really organized it well. After Hillel and Shammai, there were lots of little tweaks, but the basic organization was done. And the only real additions were things that we had to do because the temple had been destroyed. The prayer services were fleshed out more. This had happened all right before Yeshua was with us. And so when Yeshua was here, he looked around and he basically went with the ideas of the Pharisees, which followed oral law. There were fights. There were still, arguments between factions within the Pharisees. And archaeologists have identified a minimum of 20 different factions amongst the Pharisees. Yeah, they were not monolithic, not by any stretch of the imagination. At the end of the day, if you look at what the oral law eventually was locked down as, it was in agreement with what Yeshua was saying every single time.